Hello again, welcome back. I'd like to start with just a couple of announcements first. The first one is it is now possible to evaluate the course. The form is already online and we'd appreciate as many of you as possible filling it in because we really need that feedback, and we have used it in the past to introduce improvements, or at least changes, we hope they're improvements, into the course itself. And the second announcement is that from Monday 2nd of November, next Monday, the final exams are online, and you have a week then to finish those. Now, I'm going to introduce you to my daughter. If you remember last week, I spoke about the refugee problem and the problem of refugees now coming, often leaving the camps, but also leaving directly and coming to Europe, and suggesting that's where the problem begins. Well, Nicola has just returned from 4 months in South Sudan in one of the camps for internal replacement or internal displacement, and I'd like her to share her experience with you now.
So hi everybody, it's lovely to have this opportunity, so I'd like to thank my father for inviting me to be here today. As he said, I've just got back from South Sudan. I was there on a humanitarian emergency mission for 4 months, working with a French international NGO called Handicap International, where we focused in a project working in the IDP camps in Juba, working with disability and vulnerability. And he asked me to come in today and just share some of the experiences that I lived whilst I was working there. This might be in contrast to what my father was talking about last week. Last week he talked about refugees and about migration. In fact, the situation in South Sudan is slightly different. We're talking about internally displaced people, and we're also talking about high reluctance of these people to move. So in complete opposition as what you talked about last week. Firstly, what is an IDP? I'm sure you all know, but just to re-clarify, an internally displaced person is a person who's been forced to flee their homes because of an armed conflict, because of natural or man-made disasters, because of violations of human rights, but they stay within their own country, so no international borders are crossed. So effectively they are fleeing violence or they are fleeing disaster within their own land. Since the start of the civil war in South Sudan in December 2013, there have been 1.5 million people internally displaced in the country. This is according to the statistics from the UNHCR. The 2 camps in Juba, which were the first protection of civilian camps to open in the country, now house about 30,000 internally displaced people. The number is not exact because quite a few people have not been registered, but it's an approximate figure. But however, it's still a quite very high number. I wanted to talk about a couple of things that struck me quite a lot whilst I was there, which, as I was saying earlier, is the reluctance of these people to move. They are very much stuck within the camps where they live, and they don't see much potential for them actually ever leaving these camps. So neither moving back to where they were originally from, nor moving to another country. They're very, very much static. There's a couple of examples I'd like to use to illustrate this, which also reflect a bit on the current situation in Juba. There were initially 2 camps in Juba. Both of them were makeshift camps that were created straight as soon as the violence erupted. So ethnic conflict started, and the people from the Nuer tribe rushed to the UN mission seeking protection. They were on a land that was marshland, and which was flooded very, very often. As soon as there was a bit of a bit of rain, the land was flooding. Also, they arrived very rapidly. They set up tents in no orderly fashion, open sewers, tents very, very close together. No services set up in any organised fashion, which meant that the hygiene situation was appalling. It meant that people were getting ill and the illness was spreading very quickly. It meant it was very difficult for international organisations to actually set up within the camp to be able to provide services. So what happened? A camp was created, a new camp, which was pre-planned according to the SFAIR standards. So the SFAIR standards are the minimum humanitarian standards that need to be used when building a refugee camp. And it was done very, very well. When the moment came to move people from one camp to the other, they refused. It was a very traumatic experience moving them from the old site to the new site, and it had to be done nearly with force, in the sense that people were actually taken and put into vans with their belongings to be moved to the new camp. So the question arises of why. What were people finding so difficult? What they were leaving a place where their lives were they were not living very nice lives. It was very difficult. They were really on top of each other, to a place that had been built especially to give them more space, to give them better hygiene facilities, etc. Still, they didn't want to go. A number of reasons is they were scared. They'd been in that camp for nearly a year, so they had recreated community bonds, which they were reluctant to break again. And they didn't want to start everything again. People had set up businesses within the camp, children had started going to school again, so there was a reluctance to break this all up again, even if it meant moving to somewhere potentially better. So that was one thing that struck me quite strongly. The second thing, which I think is interesting to share, is a big debate which is going on at in Juba at the moment, relating to the camps. The camps are now open. There's a lot of movement in and out of the camps by the IDPs themselves. Quite a few people from the Nuer tribe work in Juba town, so they leave the camps during the day, they go and work in town and they come back at night. A lot of people will go to the hospital in Juba town. They won't use the health facility in the camps anymore, but they will leave the camps and go out to the hospital, stay in the hospital and come back when they are better. So it is raising a very important question, which is the question of protection. Initially, the people were in the camps, and that was where they were meant to stay because they needed protection, because there was a direct threat to their lives because of their ethnicity. But now that there's this movement of people going backwards and forwards, some of the people from the Nuer tribe are actually living back in Juba town anymore, the question has arisen within the UN of why are people still in the camps? And here a whole other question arises, which is the question of the access to services. Within the camps now, there's a very structured setup. There are food distribution by the World Food Programme, there are water points with water which is being supplied daily, there is an emergency medical response whenever there is an outbreak. So for example, there was outbreaks of cholera whilst I was there and of malaria, which were handled very well and very rapidly. You have international NGOs that are running schools there for education. You have latrines which are constantly being upgraded, you have showers, you have very good services which you potentially would not have anymore should you decide to take your family and leave. So all of this, which is lots of different dynamics altogether, are making these people prefer to stay in the camp rather than leave again. So this was just a reflection to sort of counterbalance what my father was talking about last week about, I think he called them, what did he call them, refugee shoppers or something like that?
Asylum shoppers.
Asylum shoppers, thank you. That in fact there are people who will stay in their own country and want to stay in their own country, and it is up to, I think, foreign policy or international aid to actually be able to support people to be able to do that and to start rebuilding their countries and be active participants in that process of rebuilding, rather than feeling that actually their only option is to take their family and all their bags and walk for thousands of kilometres looking for better opportunities. That is what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you found it interesting. I will, if anyone has any questions, I will be on the forum, so please feel free to drop me a line if you want to know a bit more about Juba, about the POC camps and what was happening down there. And just to confirm, it will be my father back next week on his own, as I will have left the country. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a nice week.